Is there any difference from what you are doing and what Monsanto is doing? How many minutes do they get to do this? Or
Maybe I'll go first. So we don't work with, neither of us work with Monsanto. I don't have any funding from private industry. This comes up a lot. The rice we developed has been distributed freely in the less developed world. It's all nonprofit work. Monsanto is a large corporation whose goal is to sell seed and profit from that seed. And they have been very successful. They've used many tools. They use conventional breeding tools. They use genetic breeding, genetic engineering. I think one misperception is somehow that the genetic engineering technology is completely tied up with Monsanto. But technology is simply technology. Anybody can use it. Genetic engineering technology was developed in the public domain. It's certainly been used by Monsanto and the large corporations, but it's also been used by virtually every scientist in the world. I mean, it's a very common, simple technology. The predictions are that in about 5 years, I mean, it is true that BT crops, for example, HT crops in the United States, much of that seed is sold by very large corporations, but it's also true this technology is so powerful that I hope you have seen from our slides that it's being rapidly adopted all over the world, and it's predicted that within 4 years, most of the genetically engineered crops around the world will be released by national institutions for the use of those their own people. So, for example, China, Brazil, India, all those companies have university scientists like myself working to develop crops that are important for enhancing sustainability and for the public good. So I think there is, unfortunately, a lot of resistance to the technology simply because it has been used by Monsanto. But I also want to point out that if you do not want to buy anything from corporations, and certainly I understand that and respect that, but rejecting the process of genetic engineering will not get you to that goal. And that's because these large corporations that are developing seeds are using all approaches. They're using approaches such as mutagenesis, precision breeding, embryo rescue, many different types of laboratory approaches that are all allowed to be certified organic. And in the United States, most farmers do buy their seed. They buy them from for-profit corporations, companies, organic farmers, and conventional farmers. So I think we have a very productive seed industry in the United States that is serving farmers. And certainly there are farmers that are saving their own seed, but in the US it's dramatically different from the rest of the world. So for example, in Bangladesh and India, most farmers are not buying their seed. They don't have any money. So when you develop new varieties to those countries, the farmers need to be able to self-pollinate their seed. And whether the seed was developed through genetic engineering or other technologies, they can still self-pollinate their seed. Seed is seed. And so that's something I think is not widely understood, that there are different farming systems, that in the U.S., much of our nonprofit seed breeding...
Excuse me, Pamela, if you could, we have lots of questions. Okay.
Clarify some confusion.
Yeah. We'll go to Raoul for just a little bit, but in the interest of time and your time, and the questions will be posted on the web, but I appreciate all your answers. Thank you.
I'd just like to say briefly that the main idea in our book is to develop ecologically based sustainable farming systems that integrate both the practices of organic agriculture, crop rotation and the things that I spoke about, along with the most improved seed, the most appropriate seed that can be used to create the most sustainable farming system. So I don't think those are necessarily Monsanto's goals, but I think that those should be the goals of people trying to develop the most sustainable farming system.
Thank you. The next question, and I'll just put this open and maybe someone raise your hand and David will give you the microphone. and it may be a couple of you want to answer this. Should Boulder County Parks and Open Space use precautionary principle and not allow GMOs on its ag and forest lands?
Wants to take that one?
You know, just like the speaker here was talking a minute ago, it's about agroecology and the appropriate use of those inputs in managing a sound agricultural system. And so I think that rather than have a broad anti-GMO policy, that the county and the citizens of the county and the producers in the county should be able to look at what is appropriate, what fits the ecological, environmental, economic niche for those producers, and have flexibility in what kind of inputs they choose to implement. I think that it serves everyone well to be progressive and open-minded in what's out there. There's certainly been issues where plant and animal biotechnology has had questionable outcomes. On the other hand, there's certainly yield improvements, drought tolerance, salt tolerance issues that have benefited a lot of the population, a lot of the growing population and people. So I think, again, it should be a case-by-case, issue-by-issue basis and not a broad policy.
Thank you. Would someone else like to address that?
I would like to agree with what Tim said, but I think that there's best management practices that need to be employed with any management tool. And I look at genetic or transgenic crops as a tool. It can be misused or used properly. And so I think having the whole complement of best management practices to use it properly is appropriate. It's just like with using pesticides. They can be used properly or they can be misused. And so this is just one more of those tools that has to be used wisely for the benefit of the producer, the benefit of the public, and for the future use of that tool.
Well, I mean, clearly this is a decision to be made by the people of Boulder County, what kind of environment they want to live in. But I think you certainly have to look at the evidence to date. And the first GMO was the recombinant bovine somatotropin injected into dairy cattle. And the evidence now shows that it does elevate the levels of IGF-1, which is linked to prostate and breast cancer in humans. The herbicide-tolerant crops now have yielded an agricultural landscape with at least 20 herbicide-resistant weeds. And that was predicted, and if a precautionary principle were being used, they wouldn't have been commercialized, but now we have widespread herbicide resistance in the weeds. And the same thing is happening with the BT. There is resistance developing in the insect populations, and it's quite misleading to say that the GM crops have led to a decrease in pesticides. Actually, has been an increase in pesticide applications, and that's not counting the fact that every cell of the BT crop is registered as a pesticide. Those pesticides remain viable in the environment. Research from Indiana University is now finding the BT toxins in water sources, and they're not just limited to the corn borer. They are toxic to caddisfly larvae in the aquatic ecosystem, and caddisfly is a keystone species eaten by many other aquatic organisms. So you have to look at the evidence, and the evidence is not good, and it's unnecessary. We have high beta-carotene corn, high-protein corn, salt-tolerant wheat, drought-tolerant rice, high-yielding lentils, and soybeans with low levels of saturated and trans fats, all currently being bred without genetic engineering. And it's my understanding that the rice you're working on is not transgenic, correct? Correct? I mean, it's not transgenic. It's the DNA is from rice. It's selected breeding using genetic.
Could you hand the microphone
Yeah, I
to
will, but I wanted to clarify.
Okay, so a couple things. So one thing we really try to be careful about is to use science-based information, and I think that is very critical when you're talking about sustainability. What is the science-based information to achieve sustainability? And we can't get into all the details now, but there's an online debate you might want to look into. Adrian asked me to mention this. So if you look at the Economist online, it's a debate between myself and Charles Benbrook, who runs the Organic Center here in Davis. And I have every statement that I have said today is really supported by massive peer-reviewed evidence. The reduction in insecticides is really indisputable now. And so I would encourage you to look at those references. So please don't interrupt. And so I would encourage you to get that science-based information. And so one thing I really want to emphasize, I agree with the first two speakers just so much, transgenic technology, genetic engineering is simply a tool. It's no better or worse than genetic alteration through conventional breeding. It's just a different kind of seed, and it must be integrated into a carefully managed system. And that's something that we've seen with herbicide tolerance. So if you spray herbicides, it doesn't matter if the herbicide tolerant crop was developed through mutagenesis or conventional methods, or if it's developed through genetic engineering. If you use a lot of herbicides, you will develop tolerance. So again, if you don't want herbicide tolerance, you need to cut out the use of herbicides or manage it in a different way. So again, it doesn't have to do with the technology of genetic engineering. And genetic engineering can introduce, to answer your question, Jim, genetic engineering can introduce a gene from rice into rice. It can be used to introduce a gene from a completely different species into that crop. So genetic engineering is really simply a method of gene delivery. And I think what the first two speakers were pointing out, what matters is the trait, and what matters is how the farmers are able to use it. And the larger questions of sustainability must be addressed. Is it benefiting farmers? Is it reducing insecticide use? And that's...
If you would hold your applause, we have more time for questions then. If you want to do a thumbs up, fine. But hold your applause, please. These two are related. The presentation did not address the objective of the GMO companies to own the intellectual property, to own the key to rice, wheat, corn genes. And then this question is, how do we assure that diversity is maintained and that farmers have affordable access to the results of genetic research given the current atmosphere of privatization and monopolization?
Was that all one question?
That was one question. Do your best.
I think we'll probably go down the table again here so everybody has a chance.
Okay, so very good questions, and I think the second question was how can we be sure the benefits of genetic information is broadly available, not privatized? Is that right? So I think that there's a case in the Justice Department right now looking at monopolies of seed companies. So there is, much of our seed market here is dominated by large corporations, and so that is an issue for the Department of Justice. And again, I encourage you to unlink that from the technology itself, because genetic engineering technology can be used by anyone. I mean, high school students are using this. It's a very simple technology. And then the first question also had to do with intellectual property issues. And, you know, that may be moot because the courts just ruled, apparently it's going to be appealed, but they just ruled that we can't, scientists, companies can't patent genes, right? And so the large companies are trying to patent whole plant varieties. So again, it's independent of whether you isolate a gene or not. You know, the large companies want to have these patents. They don't care if it's on a single gene or if it's on the entire variety. They want to have these patents. So again, it's an important issue. And again, I encourage you to unlink it from the concept of genetic engineering.
Okay.
I think certainly part of the answer is to reinvigorate public plant and animal breeding, which has been gutted in the last 20 years at the public institutions with the basic takeover by the biotech companies. And the same has happened in the entire seed industry. So we need to, and there is now, from the grassroots, a growing organic seed movement and seed saving movement. And I think those are very positive developments that as they grow, just like in the local food movement, will go a long way to democratizing this whole sector.
Regarding intellectual property, I'm also concerned about the concentration of genetic resources in fewer and fewer, larger and larger companies. But again, that's counterbalanced with the publication of the genomes of the major crop species, like the Human Genome Project as well. So the corn genome, the wheat genome, the rice genome, these genetic libraries are out there for researchers large and small to work with for innovation and to foster new crops, new varieties, new approaches. So it's a very complex subject, but again, we do have a lot of public information out there to encourage smaller and innovative approaches to crop improvements and genetic diversity. But I agree also that we need to have public support for university-based, institutional-based seed development, crop breeding, plant breeding and development projects, and there's been a decline in that in the past 20, 25 years. And again, as a public policy, we need to support that, in my mind.
Maybe this question, okay, just a little bit more, and then...
Just quickly, there has been tremendous consolidation in the seed industry, and I don't think it's benefited the growers. And I think it would be great to break up the seed industry so there's more competition, more biodiversity in the seed crops, more opportunities for small companies to make seed and have a successful business.
Cindy, on this question, maybe I thought give you enough. Oh, okay. If you want to take it. Okay. Increasing resources such as food and energy are needed to support an increasing population. Isn't the real problem population growth? Isn't that what is the real threat to sustainability? General policy.
Who wants to take that one? All right, let's take Rob.
One optimistic note is that after 2050, demographers predict that the population is going to decline. So after a certain point, I think the agricultural situation in the world should become more manageable. In between then and now, it's very difficult to make the decision about who lives and who dies. So I think it's worthwhile for us all to make sure everyone lives.
Well, definitely I agree with the premise of the question that hunger is not just a function of production, but certainly economics, politics, storage, distribution, and most importantly, education and the empowerment of women. That are the critical things. And if we're concerned about world hunger, we wouldn't be feeding a third of the U.S. corn crop to our cars that we are right now. We're very disingenuous, and I had one final thing to add to that last one, and that is if this is good technology, it should be labeled. There should be transparency all the way through the system so that consumers can make a choice, so they know what they're buying. And that's just common sense, and that has also been suppressed.
Just a last thing on the energy and food needs. I'm in agreement that part of this is supply chain problem. We're not getting food to the right people. Last I saw, we produce two times the number of calories the U.S. needs to actually feed ourselves. And we get rid of a lot of it in food waste, and we lose a lot of it because it's just it's never distributed to who needs it. So some of that problem can be solved without production, although I think production is still needed. The second thing that gets brought up in international development circles a lot is the meat and dairy base of the diet, and the fact that as much as we want to say local foods might be the answer, you can make a much vaster impact on food availability if people were just eating one less serving of meat a week. I mean, there's so much more energy intensity in meat than other products that some of it could be just the mix of the diet as well, and some of those solutions get you part the way as well.
Absolutely, agree with what I've heard. And one thing to point out is, so we talk about this a little bit in the book. It's true, if everybody in the world quit eating meat, there'd probably be enough land, water, and food to go around. Unfortunately, things are changing the other way. As countries become wealthier, they tend to eat more. And so this is really a huge problem. It's an interrelated problem, energy, food, and meat consumption.
Okay. Here's a question. How sustainable is it to have a grass-fed dairy in our semi-arid region? Incorporating rotational grazing still would require large inputs of water.
I think I spoke of that a little bit in one of my responses, and I know it's being done in Colorado, but it's being done at a very, very high cost to that producer, and I think it's very hard to sustain that because water is so expensive for irrigating grass, and our growing season is not able to sustain year-round grass for dairy cattle. So it's really difficult. We can't get by with that like we can in other areas of the country. So, but we can, rather than either or, why can't it be a blend? And I think there are good successes in that area too, where we're seeing more emphasis on grass-fed dairies, and they augment that with silage and hay when they don't have pasture available. So it's not an all or nothing. It doesn't have to be polar, but working in that continuum, striving for that ideal that the consumers are asking for and that they're willing to pay for.
Just as a reference on this point, in my experience in shortgrass prairie and high plains natural systems, you might be able to produce 400 to 600 pounds of dry quality forage a year per acre. And in an irrigated setting, high quality irrigated setting, you might produce 8,000 pounds. And so you can see the dramatic difference in the amount of land and inputs that would be needed to sustain that. And in both cases, we have 4 or 5 months of dormancy, where you don't have the kind of land production ongoing year-round to put animals out for grazing. So it's a real challenge in this area, and I agree with Cindy that some sort of combination and blend is probably appropriate in this area.
Thank you. Here's another question. What fraction of your agency's budget is devoted to the study of sustainable agricultural practices in traditional/indigenous indigenous societies? If the answer is none, why? So what fraction of your agency's budget is devoted to the study of sustainable agricultural practices in traditional indigenous societies?
When you say traditional indigenous societies, are you talking about the U.S. or are you talking about...
Well, let's stick with the U.S.
Okay. I can speak, since I'm representing the Western Sustainable Ag Research and Education Program through USDA today, 100% of what SARE's funding goes to is to promote and research sustainable agriculture and all of that encompasses. We are looking, we're always trying to direct as much of our funding towards underserved minorities as we can. And so I would call indigenous people part of that underserved minority audience probably. So That's how I'll answer that question.
Thank you.
In my agency, we oversee the conservation title of the Farm Bill. We don't oversee the commodity title. There's the food and nutrition title. There's an energy title this year. There's trade. It's an enormous piece of legislation. And the next one, in fact, comes up for renewal, or this one comes up for renewal in 2012. So if you'd like to influence it, it's time to be engaged with the people who are making those decisions and your legislators. But in the state of Colorado, my agency receives somewhere in the order of $40 million a year for conservation programs, of various types of conservation programs. And we work very closely with communities on a watershed scale. And we have a structure that we have national priorities, we have state level priorities, and that's provided to us through a group called the State Technical Committee. It has representatives from agricultural producer groups, the universities, trade associations, other agencies around the state that provides us information on what our policy guidance should be. That's at the state level. At the watershed level, we deliver services in the 10, what we call geopolitical basins around the state. So the upper and lower South Platte Basin, the Rio Grande Basin, the upper and lower Arkansas River Basin, the Colorado River Basin, the Dolores River in the southwest, the Gunnison and the Dolores we work with together, and then the watersheds in the northwest part of the state. We outreach and work with the tribes down in the southwest part of the state, the Ute Mountain Utes and the Southern Ute tribes. We work very closely with them on support on a nation-to-nation basis for the conservation management and activities that they want to undertake. I've met with the tribal councils a number of times to discuss their priorities and the priorities of the tribes and their individual members. They're a very unique group. In a general sense, the Ute Mountain Utes are very challenged economically. The Southern Utes tend to have a lot more resources, and a lot of that's being derived from mineral rights and mineral development on their tribes. So we work with the Acequia groups. It's a community irrigation system that's older than the state of Colorado in the southern part of the San Luis Valley. Those of you who've seen or read the Milagro Beanfield Wars, that social structure and irrigation network is an Acequia, and it's called the Vero Strip and Acequia type community. We outreach and work with them very closely as well. So my agency tries to provide support for Indigenous communities, underrepresented communities, and I think in 2010 we provided about between 15 and 20% of our program delivery on a financial perspective went to those communities across the state. One other program we work with is called Conservation Innovation Grants, and so we work with the State Technical Committee to identify what are the priorities around the state. Organic agricultural systems is one of those. And then we seek out innovative approaches, both environmentally, economically, to address those conservation priorities. There's been a couple of pretty successful conservation innovation grants in this area through the local conservation districts and with the St. Vrain Valley Young Farmers, and the Extension Service have been involved. And they've dealt with soil quality issues, and they've dealt with nutrient management issues in agriculture. So I'd have to say NRCS works pretty hard through the conservation title to outreach in that regard.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to stay another 5-10 minutes? Well, let's do one more question. Here's an honest person. Okay. One more question. This is directed to Jim Riddle. Given the proven advantages of GM agricultural products, what data do you have to justify your opposition to GM products for organic production? In other words, why shouldn't sugar beet farmers be allowed to use GM beet seed? Where's the data?
Yeah, well, the data is in peer-reviewed studies, but and I was starting to say some of that. The Bt toxin, University of Indiana has found, does accumulate in water systems and is toxic to caddisflies and other aquatic organisms. That is factual. That is happening. That was not required by EPA in the assessment of these technologies. Now there's data just from this summer showing that the Roundup Ready canola is escaping into the wild and is actually interbreeding in the wild and creating a combination of traits that have never been commercialized. So these are living organisms that have been released, and this is found in North Dakota. It was in the proceedings of the National Academy of Science. I mean, there's the court in Ohio on the labeling of milk that is non-RBST found that the science shows that the RBST treated milk does have elevated levels of insulin growth-like factor number 1, and the science also shows separately that elevated levels of IGF-1 are related to breast cancer and prostate cancer. There has not been the science to connect the milk to those cancers. But the President's Council on Cancer just this year said that there are numerous environmental causes for cancers, and the way to avoid exposure is to consume foods grown without pesticides, without antibiotics, and without growth hormones. That's from the President's Cancer Panel. There's just mounting evidence.
Okay.
And a lot of the science hasn't been done, frankly, because it wasn't required that it be done before these GMOs be released into the environment and part of the human food chain.
Okay.
There was a substantial equivalence doctrine over in 1992 saying that if the GM corn looks like corn, there doesn't need to be either the environmental or human health studies before it's released. That was a totally non-scientific political decision made in the early 90s that carries through to this day.
Okay, thank you. Would one of the other panelists like to say just a few words, and then I'll turn it over to David.
Well, I just can't resist because so there's this concept of broad scientific consensus, and so you see on the right, apparently the 23 new members of the House of Representatives and the Republicans, they don't believe in global climate change. That's despite clear scientific evidence, much of it's carried out here in Boulder County, showing that the Earth is warming. And so there's this concept of science denialism that I'm afraid happens on the right and the left. And we see that again with genetically engineered crops. There is, and I think Jim didn't actually address the question, there is just clear evidence that insecticide usage has been reduced dramatically around the world, and there is not any studies that I'm aware of that would actually dispute that anymore. I mean, certainly it was a question, a legitimate question 14 years ago, before BT crops were on the market, would it reduce insecticide usage? Now there are studies in virtually every continent showing there's been massive reductions in insecticides, and those reductions in insecticides are directly linked with reduction in harm to farmers' health. And so, again, I think a lot of the time the debate moves off into non-scientific areas, and certainly as a scientist must go to the science-based information. I mean, it's certainly another question about philosophy, and I respect that. I can understand somebody might say, well, I don't want a bacterial gene in my rice plant. That is legitimate. That's a philosophy that one would not argue with. Some people believe in God, some people don't. I mean, it's not something you would dispute. But the larger goals of sustainable agriculture are really critical. Is how is it affecting the environment, and how is it affecting human health?
Okay. Thank you very much, and let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you.
So first, I just have to go. So this is the group right now. When I was putting this forum together and we as a group were putting this together, people asked me, they said, are you serious? People want to sit around and talk for 3 hours about agriculture? Who wants to do that? Well, this is a group that will go for 3 hours and 5 minutes, and it looks like 3 hours and a half and 4 hours. So again, I appreciate all of you coming out this evening. I appreciate our forum, our volunteers. All these people on this panel have volunteered their time to be here tonight, to be part of this conversation with Boulder County. And again, you, as the audience who sat here for 3 hours and participated in this conversation. One of the last cards that came up here was just Boulder County going to continue this conversation. And again, with our cropland policy, I mentioned this is the third phase we're at. We will have ongoing conversations. I think Adrian hit on the fact that on January 19th, we'll have another local seminar featuring local farmers, producers, and local industries. Boulder County is also selecting a citizens advisory group that the commissioners will be selecting those people to sit down and have these conversations as Parks and Open Space develops their plan. This group will be able to look at that document, work with us, and help develop that document as well. Continuing on what we have going, we'll have this process. I lost that note card. We actually will have this going to the Food and Ag Policy Committee. That is also open to the public. So as you have input there, the public can have conversation of that. It'll go to the Parks and Open Space Advisory Committee. Again, another chance for public input. And finally, it'll go before the Board of County Commissioners, where again, the public will have an opportunity to speak on our cropland policy. So again, this conversation is not over. I see faces in here that I've seen on these buses and tours in the past. I appreciate that. I see new faces. And I think the goal here is that, as we started, that we could have a lively debate with a broad spectrum of ideas. And I think we did have that at this table. So again, I thank everyone for being here this evening. There are some more snacks and stuff out there. That goes back to the 4-H kids. So if you want to stop by that table, again, I think everyone up here is agreed that is the future of farming. That's the future of ranching, is those kids out there. So if you can stop by that table, that'd be great. Oh, and we'll have a book signing afterwards as well. Thank you, everybody.